Hello and welcome to the definitive rankings of Column Mechanic's second finest archetype, Magical Muskets. Now, I'll admit I am actually a big fan of Column Mechanics. I've played almost every single one except for S-Force because that archetype is just not quite yet playable. But we're not talking about S-Force today, we're talking about Magical Muskets. I have the list same as last time, except I removed the good but not in its own deck tier just because this archetype is so landlocked it doesn't even matter. So to kick this off, we have Magical Musket Caspar. The notable face of the deck when it first released, it is the Searcher. Magical Muskets work in a certain way that they allow you to play your in-archetype spells and traps as effectively hand traps. Each of the monsters have a trigger each time a spell or trap is activated in their column, and Caspar has the effect of searching. As a searcher, searchers always go into really strong, unless they're once per turn. I'm looking at you, engage. Then we have Magical Musketeer Starfire. Starfire, when she has a trigger, summons from deck. Now, generally this archetype was designed to be a control deck, but with the way the deck has been designed as of late, it's more or less a going second UTK deck, so the swarming is actually really handy and helps you go into your further Utopia double plays, which we'll get into later. So I actually think in the way that Magical Muskets are played nowadays, she goes ahead of Caspar. Though notably if you're playing a control list, Caspar would be better. Then we have Kid Brave. Kid Brave, I'm not generally happy about, but you do have to run him in that high numbers. He discards a Magical Musket card to draw 2 whenever he has a spell trigger, which is not great. This deck already has a problem with generating hand advantage, and going net even on card economy is only okay. This deck has a problem with hand advantage, and discarding one of your Magical Musket cards that in your hand that you kind of probably wanted to keep is generally not ideal, as the draw 2 might not even get you anything that you wanted. So you have to run him. I'm not a fan of him, but he probably goes at okay, not upset to have, just because he is still a draw 2. Then we have Magical Musketeer Doc. Doc is a good boy and he's your recursion. He's terrible to start with since you can't recur anything and there's nothing in the grave to recur, but he can recur both monsters and spells and traps. So you do definitely run him. He is a staple, but he's not exactly a strong staple, so I'll put him above Kid Brave. Then there's Calamity. Calamity is the optimal second target for a level 4 other than Starfire to make your Utopia double plays. And why she is the optimal target is because she provides further swarming to this archetype. She can special summon a Magical Musket monster from your graveyard when she has a spell trigger, which is notably a lot better than the other level 4 target, which is going to be Wild. And she's definitely a staple, but you don't have to run nearly as many copies of her just because she's tutorable through Starfire. So she'll probably go into really strong staple card, just not as many numbers as you'd hope you'd run her, but you could increase her numbers if you felt like it. Then we have Magical Musketeer Wild. He is recursion, but in the form of shuffling 3 named cards in graveyard to draw 1. He's decent for a long game, but this deck has a hard time playing from behind, so he's not going to be helping a whole lot, especially when he's taking away resources from Calamity and Doc at the same time. He's a tech choice in long formats, but arguably you're not playing this in control related formats. Arguably, you're not playing this deck in control formats anyway. And then we have Zakiel, the boss monster this deck was designed for. And he leaves a lot to be desired. You can tribute summon, mind you, tribute summon in a normal summon reliant archetype, one of your Magical Musketeer monsters to summon him out, which is terrible. But what does he do? Well, he basically draws you cards based on the amount of spells and traps you used on your opponent's turn. And that basically puts a giant ass target on his back. There's no way your opponent's going to let this man stay around to the end of their turn if they can help it. It's a staple in the going first variants, but generally you don't even really want to run it then because he's kind of terrible. People will look at you differently if you run this card. Your peers might actually will shun you. And we now have the spells and traps. Doc's Steady Hands. This card is effectively an honest for the archetype, as it doubles your Magical Musketeer monster's attack points. While you're not able to attack with the monster that is being boosted, it's mainly just a battle trick honest-like effect until you realize that this archetype is filled with light monsters, so you could just run honest anyway. And on top of that, this entire archetype is filled with tiny monsters other than Zakiel, so this damage increase doesn't do a whole lot anyway. So it's kind of terrible. I know, I tried making it work, it just doesn't. Just run honest. Then we have Magical Musketeer Crossdom, a actual crazy card in the archetype, effectively an effect veiler, and it drops a monster's attack to 0. So this can be used during the damage step, and is a prime key piece for the Utopia double combo in which this deck is known for. So it's 100% going to be busted carries the deck. How can you ever turn down a battle trick, a really decent one, and a effect veiler on top of that? It's just way too good to pass up. And then we have our prime removal for the deck, Desperado. Desperado pops any face-up card your opponent controls, any single one of them. A quick pop from your hand is no joke and kind of is one of the main reasons why this deck has any amount of power to begin with. So it's definitely going to go and busted carries the deck. It's one of the strongest cards this deck has, and you want to see it in almost every hand. Then we have Dancing Needle. While this card seems absolutely insane on the surface, it's more or less a tech choice. Definitely a tech choice. But on the top of it, because it is crazy, it can banish 3 cards from either graveyard, which makes it basically an Allied Justice Cycle Reader, but on crack. It's only not run more because it's a format dependent card. If it's not a really graveyard reliant format, then it's going to struggle to see a lot of use to run it at more copies other than 1, but it is definitely a powerhouse in Grieve related formats. So I think tech choice is a very comfortable spot. Then we have Fiendish Deal. All this card does, it protects your magical musket monsters from being destroyed by card effects, which is not great. And it has a second effect that if it's destroyed, it can search for magical musket cards from your deck and grave to your hand. And while this card is really not great, it definitely is a good tech choice, because some archetypes, some decks are really destruction reliant in their removal. So it might cause some decks to struggle to remove bigger threats that you could put out, like say Zakiel if you were running him. But generally you don't want to run it anyway. Your magical musket monsters are small enough anyway that anything can run over them by battle, which this doesn't protect them from. So it's just not great. Then we have Magical Musketeer Crooked Crown. One of our more recent cards from Dane. I say recent even though Dane was a few years ago. It's our best way to swarm the field as of late. All this card does is that it special summons a magical musket monster from your hand. Oh, and I guess it blocks off a monster zone on your opponent's side, but that effect almost never ever comes up. It's a 100% a stable card, but it doesn't do a whole lot other than provide the swarming. You run this mainly to facilitate the Utopia double OTK combos and to generate some amount of field presence, but not much more than that. You definitely run this, but you definitely don't run more copies of it, as a continuous traffic can clog up your field really fast. Next, there's Magical Musket Last Stand. Last Stand is literally just a counter trap that can be activated from hand on spell and traps. This is an answer to any spell and trap, including the Solemns. Notably though, you can't use it if your normal summon gets solemned, but you take what you can get. This card is 100% a strong stable card, but you know, run as many copies as you think the format will allow you to. And then we have the entire reason why this deck is being played going second at all right now. The entire reason why this deck has seen any amount of competitive play as of recent. Magical Musketeer Max. Max is absolutely fucking insane. Max allows you to special summon Magical Musketeer monsters with different names from your deck, equal to the amount of spell and traps your opponent controls, so you can literally summon 5 monsters if you're so lucky. or you can add Magical Musketeer spell and traps to your hand with different names equal to the amount of monsters your opponent controls. This amount of card advantage this guy generates is insane, and if your opponent doesn't know how this deck works and Ashes Caspar as opposed to Max, they might as well have just lost the game. This guy's power level is off the charts. He is the best card in the deck. He cannot be disputed. He makes the deck what it is. He is an absolute threat. This is my own personal deck list of Magical Muskets, the going second variant I kept mentioning all so much. I recently took it to locals and did quite well with it, although I know it's not saying too much considering it's locals, but it's something. First, we have 3 copies of Caspar, 3 copies of Starfire, 3 copies of Kid Brave, 1 copy of Calamity, and 2 copies of Doc. This is the standard monster lineup for any Musket deck. Then we have 3 Desperado, 2 Last Stand, 1 Crooked Crown to be searched out, and 1 Dancing Needle for when we need it. 3 Cross Domination, the heart and soul of this deck, and 3 Forbidden Droplets. I didn't get to use this a lot when I was playing in locals, so I'm not entirely sure how cuttable this is, but you can probably find better things to run in place of this. Then we have the staple Upstart Goblin, Mind Control, Double or Nothing for the Utopia Double, Call by the Grave to eat some of these hand traps that are going to be thrown at you, 1 Monster Reborn, and we have 2 Ready Fusion and 1 Insta-Fusion. Insta-Fusion going to 1 in the past hurt this deck kind of like a lot, but Ready Fusion is a good supplementary engine to use to facilitate more level 4 bodies. And then the package that carried me a lot through the tournament is 2 Jizukuru, 2 Gamma Seal, and 3 Kaiju Slumber. Kaiju Slumber just put in so much work, and so did Gamma Seal. I really like this engine in this deck. It is way too good. And for the extra deck, 3 Max, don't leave the home without him. The Nightmare package of Unicorn, Phoenix, Cerberus, and a Link 4 Boral Sword for a little bit extra killing power. Pentastag to give your Utopia Piercing, Link Spider to make an effect body on Carbonal Warrior, and Utopia Double and Utopia. The heart and soul of why this deck can kill you out of nowhere, and the surprise power that this deck has. Gagaga Cowboy because fuck time rules, and Millenniumizer Strict, Mud Dragon the Swamp, and Carbonal Warrior all as instant fusion / ready fusion targets. These are just 2 other level 4s that can easily be used to get into Utopia if your plays get stopped in any way. And that's the list. I plan on making more of these in the future, so if you want to see this with a different archetype, let me know what you think and subscribe if you want to see it. I do stream on Twitch irregularly, so don't feel afraid to pop in and say hi if you want to. And I have a Twitter that I mainly post pictures of my new puppy on. And with that, I'll leave you be.